Well, LCS finals are over and we are headed into Worlds, and I know what a lot of people would say is it is too early to talk about off season. We should focus on Worlds, etc., etc. But guess what? I think the teams that are not going to Worlds are not having that mentality. They're already starting to think about off season. And so I just thought it would be kind of interesting for all of you to have this video finding out who is actually going to have their contracts expire this year. Now, I want to be clear that there's a good chance that maybe a team might be in negotiations with one of these players right now or their agent to re-sign them so they never enter the market. But at the very least, there's a much higher chance of one of these players ending up on a different team than, a standard player who's signed or already locked into a 2 to 3 year deal. So we're going to go through all the different teams and take a look at them. I'm also going to touch on, academy players that I think are notable, not all of them, but here we go. So first off, speaking of academy, 100 Thieves doesn't have any of their main roster players going into free agency or having their contracts end, but Fake God, Soligo, and Prismal are all players who are on their academy roster who do have contracts expiring this year. Now, these are all notable players because I think they've gotten a lot of praise. They're pretty well known for being academy players. Some of them obviously have played in the LCS for short stints previously. So we will see what ends up happening there. But perhaps if you are thinking about what your favorite team could grab, those academy players might be somebody who they try to sign, assuming those players go into free agency. Next up, we have CLG. Now, obviously, I personally expect to see a lot of roster changes coming to this team, even among players that have been signed for quite some time. And I think a lot of CLG fans and LCS, thinking people will also have a lot to say about CLG, but they only actually have one player whose contract is expiring this year, and that is Ruin. Now, Ruin received a lot of criticism, I think, this year. Sometimes people have thought that he does quite well, but I think for the most part, the vibes are not particularly amazing for Ruin. So we'll see if he gets re-signed to CLG or if another team picks him up, but he is becoming a free agent this year, theoretically. Moving on to Dignitas, we have two LCS players that are having contracts expire. One is Viper and one is Dardoch. So both of these players, I think, have, received a lot of criticism in different ways, right? A lot of people were not particularly impressed with Viper's play this year, especially compared to how maybe they felt about him previously. And then Dardoch he's Dardoch. So, it'll be really interesting to see if Dignitas decides to keep Dardoch around or if he ends up on a different team. Part of the problem for Dardoch is he's actually been on a lot of LCS teams previously. So if he does become a free agent, I think it's going to be limiting on where he could go. Obviously, he could return to one of his previous teams, but I don't know. I feel like, he has this reputation and it might be difficult for him to find a spot. But either way, perhaps he'll get re-signed. Evil Geniuses has two players that are expiring this year with their contracts. One is Kumo, who again had moments that people felt pretty good about, but ultimately ended up getting replaced later on this season by Huni. So he might not stay on EG, might go someplace else. And then Golden Glue. And Golden Glue, similar to Dardoch, but not, in the same way. But Golden Glue has been on a lot of different teams, and he's been around the LCS for a long time. And so if EG decides not to renew his contract or they decide to pick up another player, and there is an interesting mid laner who's potentially becoming a free agent this year, we'll get to that in a second. We're going to have to see if he does end up on another team or if he maybe moves into a coaching role or if he, does any number of different things. He could play an academy. We'll find out. Now, speaking of academy, EG also has Matt, who hasn't played in the LCS for a while, but he's actually an academy player for EG, if you remember him. Obviously, he had a time on Team Liquid for a while. So I'm not sure if they will renew or if he'll end up on another team, but it does seem like he's been kind of in academy for a while, so we'll have to find out. Now, there is a Worlds team, by the way, who has, there's multiple teams at Worlds, but who have expiring contracts. But our first one is Santorin from FlyQuest. So Santorin, his contract is expected to expire or planned to expire unless they renew sometime before then. Obviously this November when everybody else's due. Everyone else's expire? There we go. So we'll have to find out what happens there. But if you are a FlyQuest fan, I think that could be kind of making you nervous because he's had a really standout season. And if I was another team looking to pick up a jungler during the free agency experience, I think that he's definitely one of those players that I would have a target on and hoping that he doesn't get re-signed so that I could pick him up. Although I guess we'll have to see how he does at Worlds. Golden Guardians. So Golden Guardians obviously had a really great season. People, I think, were really impressed with what they did in summer. In fact, this was their best performance ever as a franchise. And they have Hanser and Huhi who are going into free agency. Now, great news for Huhi that after being, I don't know, considered not very impressive by some, including myself, for quite some time. In fact, he left CLG, I guess, maybe not looking too great, and then Golden Guardians threw him on support, and a lot of people didn't believe him. Now he's going into free agency. Thank God for him that he just had the season that he did. A lot of people say that Golden Guardians were the best bot lane towards the end of the split, especially in playoffs. So he's got a really good reputation ahead of him. If he goes into free agency, there's a good chance, I think, that if he wanted to, he could go find another spot on a different team. And Hanser, who has been a mainstay of that organization for so long, or at least it feels like so long, he also could be exploring free agency. So we'll see where he ends up. I think it's unlikely, but it's another player who TSM could bring back to their old roster. Reunite the Bjergsen. It would be Bjergsen, Biofrost, Doublelift, Hanser, and then fortunately for them, Svenskeren is not available right now, but we will see. Also notable, Keith, who played some of this year, but is, I guess, currently an academy player. His contract is expiring as well. So we'll see if Golden Guardians re-signs him or if he ends up someplace else. And then similarly, Zion Spartan, Darshan, the president of the Players Association, his contract with Golden Guardians is expiring this year as well. So who knows what happens there. Moving on to the next Worlds team, we have Team Liquid. So I think this, if you're looking at this video and you've been waiting like, okay, when is the interesting conversation going to start around this? Maybe you haven't found the other teams to be particularly interesting. If you are a Team Liquid fan and you like this current roster, you should be concerned. Impact has a contract that is expiring. Broxa, newly signed Broxa, apparently only signed, well, I think he got bought out or transferred over. So that is why his contract is expiring this year. And then Jensen, who, as much as all the TSM fans want to shit on him right now for obviously the remarks that he made and then the fact that they lost, Jensen, I think, is a pretty hot commodity. Remember that he is a North American, like he's been regionalized or whatever. He doesn't count as an import slot, which actually we haven't talked too much about that with these other players, but like a lot of these players are residents. Santorin, by the way, a resident. And so that makes Jensen, who has won titles, gone to Worlds very frequently, is probably usually considered behind Bjergsen to be like number 2 biggest mid laner. Let's say they go to Worlds. Let's say Team Liquid goes to Worlds. They don't do well. They don't make it out of groups. Or God forbid, they don't make it out of plans. If you are Jensen, maybe you are looking for another team at that point in time. And I don't know. We'll see. I mean, obviously the big story is, or the big meme is paid by Steve. People will say things like, oh, there's just no way that these players ever leave because Steve can pay them the money that they want. But like, I don't think very many people expected Doublelift to leave Team Liquid. So I would just say, like, if this is the end of that like dynasty, the Team Liquid dynasty, the couple years thing, perhaps Jensen will be there. So I think Team Liquid fans, if you like Impact, Broxa, Jensen, if you like this roster, guess what? 60% of them could be up on the market as free agents within, shortly after Worlds. And then on the TSM side, because they are the other Worlds team, you have Treats. Now, Treats is an interesting thing to talk about, an interesting player, in part because he, I think, received a lot of praise early on, and then ultimately, like, unfortunately for him heading into free agency, if TSM decides they don't want to re-sign him or he decides to go into free agency, gonna be tough, right? Because this is a player who I think people were pretty interested in the beginning, and then like, well, what is that TSM tweet that they said they're going to play the better player? Well, if they played the better player, they decided Treats wasn't the better player because Biofrost is the one that got them through playoffs. So we'll have to see what happens there, but there's a world where Treats ends up someplace else. And again, like I talk about these from the perspectives of the fans, but maybe you are, I don't know, you want CLG to sign players. Maybe you decide Treats is a good option for them or something. I don't know. Now, there are two teams that do not have expiring players, at least not notable ones. And that's Imt and C9. Now, obviously, Imt has already dropped some of their players, so maybe that's part of the reason why we don't see anything there. And C9 has already recommitted to running back their roster, their lineup. Notable, obviously, is that C9 has pretty big name academy players, and for instance, like Diamond or whatever is not up on the market. So we'll see what happens there. And then finally, because we've run through all the different teams and we talked about the LCS players and academy, you don't usually see as much movement around coaches, but I do want to talk about some coaches that are potentially also up on the free market if they don't re-sign. One of those is Kelsey from 100T. She's a notable individual because I think a lot of people have been really happy. A lot of 100 Thieves fans have been happy to see the work that she's doing to develop their academy and 100T Next program. On FlyQuest, you have David Lim and Cop. Both have their contracts expiring. TL has Kane. Again, remember, I know they've got Jet now, but imagine Impact, Broxa, Jensen, and Kane all leave. It could happen. I don't know. It's just like that would be the end of that identity, this team that we've seen for so long. And then finally, TSM has Lustboy with an expiring contract. So these are all the players that are up on the market. I'd love to hear in the Reddit thread where maybe this video is, if it ends up over there, the YouTube comments, etc. What players and coaches that you see on this list that you think should leave the organization, might leave the organization, you hope that they don't leave the organization. I don't know. Love to hear that as we start to get into off-season rumors. They'll kick off soon. And by the way, I guess I should have said this at the start, but the date at which all these will expire is November 15th. So obviously a lot of stuff starts happening before then, even in some situations where probably it shouldn't. But you do end up in a situation. We'll start hearing rumors long before November 15th. But if these players don't sign with their teams again before November 15th, and they always could, we're going to start to see big questions around where they're going to go, right? Either way, thanks so much for watching this video and enjoy this outro that we're transitioning to now. Hello, thank you so much for watching that video. I hope you really enjoyed it. We're going to be doing a bunch of cool stuff coming into Worlds, just general league coverage and Lolly Sports coverage, but also Worlds coverage. And so it'd be really, 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 really helpful if you subscribe. We're trying to chase 200K. I don't know if we're gonna ever hit it, but it's my white whale. Moby Dick reference. It's literary. Anyway, alienware.com/Travis, because Alienware sponsors this. So if you go check that out, there's a link in the video description, and you can use Travis 10 off Q3 in order to save 10% on your order. And guess what? There's some great NVIDIA cards coming out soon that I think will start popping up on that website in builds. Let's build this channel. Let's build my sponsorship is what I'm getting at.